All right, so this is the time that we call the Afterburn, where we take up the praise, prayer. No, that's the praise and prayers after we do the music. Afterburn, we take up questions and comments about the teaching. Let's try and keep it to the teaching today as best you can. If I answer your question with a teaching I refer you to, please don't be upset. It's only because the teaching will do a better job of answering the question than a soundbite would, okay? Because if you're asking the question and you're not familiar with the teaching, then you really probably need to listen to something more thorough than a 2-minute answer. So please be patient with that. And by the way, if you ask anybody in the leadership a question that we can answer with a teaching, pretty much that's what all of them will do. They'll say, this is where you want to go if you really are interested. Okay? Now, and by the way, that will also test how serious you are. You just want to know what I believe about it, or do you really want to know the answer? Because if you want to know what I believe about it, I can give you a soundbite, but that really won't explain to you what I believe, because there's reasons why I believe. And that's why I took you through the whole scriptures and maybe took 8, 10, 12, 15 parts to explain something. So when someone says to me, but I just want to know what you believe about this, fine. If you really want to know what I believe about, listen to the teaching. But it's 15 parts. Okay, fine. Listen to the first part. If you don't like it, stop listening. I don't care. It's your thing. It's your way. You had wanted it. Okay? But you might want to listen to part 2, 3, 4 and see what that's all about. Then you will be entitled to have an opinion about what I believe, because then you'll know what I believe. I got so many people that think because I mentioned something, they think they know what I believe and they want to start commenting on it. Well, if I mention it and it has a 15-part teaching and I mention it in like a little blurb in the middle of a teaching like this, you still don't know what I believe. You have to go back. All right, who's going to go first? Steve, you got something? I know you got the mic, but you got a question or comment?
Well, I'm going to take the mic around for you.
Okay, Amy's got a question.
And I have something too.
I'll go for it first. Go ahead.
All right. I was hoping you could tie, I wrote it down, if I can read it here. If you could tie into how we look at things with the reflection of the interaction we have with men.
What do you mean? Say it again.
How we use my interaction with him affects how I want to do what I'm supposed to do with him.
Okay, again, that goes back to the whole thing we've been reading, where as you go through this process and you're developing the fear of Yahweh, you're gaining wisdom and knowledge and understanding, then you're going to have discipline and discretion in your interactions with him. And that will also affect how you interact with your Creator. Because now you might actually be more aware of what you say, what you do when you're interacting with other people. But discretion, we all have discretion. When we're aware of something, we may use discretion, but it's discretion in our human context or discretion in a Torah context. See, the more you develop what's in chapter 1 and 2 here, the more you'll know how to apply discretion the way he would, and not necessarily the way, because culture requires certain amounts of discretion. You know, in some societies, it's very polite and appropriate to walk up and shake someone's hand. In others, it's not. So it takes discretion to know whose hand to shake and whose not to. You go up to an Orthodox Jewish woman, you don't offer your hand, because she's not going to shake it anyway. Okay? But it only makes an awkward moment if you do. But if you have wisdom, knowledge, and understanding of that culture, you can bring discretion in to know not to do that. So what we need now is wisdom, knowledge, and understanding of Yahweh's ways so that we can use discretion to appropriately interact with people according to his thing, his way of doing stuff. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Okay, Amy?
I just had a really neat connection for myself that I wanted to share. I actually read this the other day. But in chapter 2 of Proverbs, in verse 6, where it says, Yahweh gives wisdom, out of his mouth come knowledge and understanding, it reminded me of Deuteronomy chapter 8, and at the end of verse 3, where he says that while he humbled us and let us suffer hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, to make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Yahweh. So not only does he give wisdom and understanding and all that, but it's every word of his that brings life for us. And then as I read the rest of the proverb, it only confirmed that for me. So I just wanted to share that.
Amen. Amen. Look, when it says that man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word, this wasn't written at that time. They didn't have a written word. Because we'll say, well, he means like the written word. We live on the written word. No, he was talking about those that had the anointing and appointing, Moses at the time and then the 70, those who were going around and teaching the word with authority. And he's telling them, by the way, then you get to Deuteronomy 17, where it talks about, and when a matter comes up that's too hard for you to know what to do, what do? You go to those anointed, appointed leaders, and then you're told you do what they tell you to do. So I'm not here to tell you you just need to go follow and listen to anybody, including me, but that you have a job to do the vet out and to find and prayerfully ask the Father to lead you to the teacher you're supposed to be with, the fivefold ministry guys you're supposed to be submitted to, so that they can help you to raise you up and help you conform into the image, as Paul teaches us in Ephesians 4. Okay? So very good connection there. Thank you. Who's got the mic now? Daweed?
I had something that I picked up from the Hebrew when you were going over verse 7, for it said, I'm reading from the King James. He lays up sound wisdom for the righteous. He is a buckler to them that walk uprightly. Your translation said blameless. When I looked at the Hebrew actually said tav cholem mem sofit, which would be tom. Same.
Integrity.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And so it just confirmed for me what you were saying, that, it's not that we were necessarily perfect in that sense, but we're just like have integrity of heart.
Amen. Okay, so when it talks about blameless, excuse me, it's talking about integrity there. Okay, so he looked it up in the Hebrew, and it has the idea of tam or integrity. Okay, awesome. Okay, same root word there. These are all part of the things that one day when I get to actually sit down and retire and write a translation, we'll be able to make those corrections and it'll be more clear. All right, who's next?
This feels like the feast with Steve walking around with the mic. I had a very blameless morning today. I just want to tell you all, it was a wonderful feeling, because 100 times I looked around my apartment at the zillion things that still have to be done before the moving van comes tomorrow, and I'd catch myself in the middle of it and go, oh, forgive me, Father. I'm sorry. And I did it 100 times, and I was able to walk into the service blameless, right? All right. Hallelujah for that. Just a word about, hearing from the Ruach. And it's so good to be warned about who should be our teacher and all that. What would you care to comment? My experience has been, as I've disciplined myself not to get instruction directly from the Ruach, but the role of Yeshua as comforter, he's living in me, and sometimes I might be asked to give up something. I read it in the Word. I hear my teacher say, you've got to stop doing this. Or there might be a situation that he's plunged me into and I want to have emunah. And I find that he is very responsive when I seek him for comfort.
Amen. Yeah.
He'll bring a scripture to my mind and say, this is what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. This is where I'm bringing you. Don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, I'm assuming that you would say hearing at the comfort level is something that we need to experience from him.
Amen. Okay, so first of all, for those who are only listening to this teaching as their first teaching, you'll have to go back to understanding the Ruach, which is a teaching that explains what I was talking about when I refer to the Ruach and what the Ruach does and doesn't do. Because some of you out there might be listening and thinking, man, this guy is so disrespectful to the Ruach. No. The Ruach has an incredibly important role, but we have to understand that role and what the Ruach does. And one of the things the Ruach does, for example, is that when you are listening to a teaching, it will convict, open up, and point out whatever little piece that was needed in your life, and then you go, oh, Okay? And that may be a different piece for you than for you or than for you or for you that you needed, that was a part of that puzzle. One little thing, maybe 5 minutes worth of the teaching, that the Ruach will go, that was the piece you were supposed to hear. And that brings you comfort, it brings you shalom, it opens up like a relief that now you know what to do. So it wasn't just because the word was taught, but the Ruach helped you know how to apply it, where to apply it, and bring that comfort. It brings to remembrance things that you have in you, like a verse that you might need, which brings comfort. Now, let's understand, the reason I'm so cautious about you just, quote unquote, listening to the Ruach is because, I've said this many times, you've got at least 3 voices in your head. Not because you're schizophrenic or multi-personality. Everybody has at least 3. You've got the spirit in man, or that voice of man, your voice, and usually the one that's beating you up the most, telling you you're a loser, an idiot, and you can't do anything, okay? Then you have and that's also the voice, by the way, that says, well, I don't like it, or I don't want to. I want, that wah, me, I. So you have a second voice, which is Hasatan's voice, the spirit of Hasatan, the spirit of the adversary, that's going to encourage you to do whatever your voice is saying, pretty much, especially if your voice is not doing what Yahweh said. Then there's a quiet, still, soft voice waiting for the other 2 to shut up. But you have to make them be quiet so that you can hear him. And that's the hard part, because the other 2 voices will absolutely try very hard to convince you they're the soft voice. They will imitate. What is the adversary? The adversary is an imitator, a mimic, a false, a phony, okay? The duplicator, but he's not the real thing. And you want to be in charge of you too, so you're going to try to convince yourself that it's his voice, not yours. So it's very hard to discern if you're just going to go by what, well, I heard a voice, or I felt in my spirit, or whatever. Well, you know what? You can't trust that so easily. It's not a man to even know how to put his own feet. We got to be careful with that. Oh, but I have the Spirit now. You don't make any mistakes now? The Spirit hasn't, quote unquote, you haven't led off in some weird directions, listening to whatever voice you listened to, only to find out it wasn't his? So we have to be careful with that. Christianity taught you, though, to totally trust in that, to never argue with it, just to completely yield yourself to that. And that opened up the door for the enemy and you to guide everything that you're doing any which way you wanted it. Now, notice I said any which way you wanted it, because the enemy is not the initiator. You start off with the thought, the desire, or whatever it is first, and he's just going to encourage you to go that way. He's going to be the cheerleader. Yeah, that's a great idea to go do that. It's his voice and your voice together that wanted you to work on your apartment this morning. But the still voice said, no, it's Shabbat. That stuff can wait. It'll be fine. Somehow it'll work out. But it was the other voices trying to convince you, no, it's okay. It's, you have an emergency. How many times does the voice convince you that something that's not life and death is your ox in a ditch? I've had people tell me that all the time. Well, I guess that was just my ox in a ditch. What do you mean? Because you got hungry because you had an hour drive here and so you had to stop to eat? Because you didn't think enough to make a sandwich before you came? I actually had people tell me that when they used to drive here an hour, and who said, well, we always stop at Arby's on the way, because the kids get hungry. Well, how does that actually work right? It's an hour, your kids get hungry, make them a sandwich. Why is that a problem? We're here a long time. My wife makes my kids food in case they get hungry while they're here. And they have a sandwich. Actually, now they're getting old enough to make their own sandwich. What I'm just saying is that other set of voices can try to convince you that it's okay, because after all, it's an ox in a ditch. It's your thing. What happens if you don't get the ox out of the ditch? It will die. Yes, if you injure yourself on Shabbat, need to go to the hospital, you go to the hospital. Okay? Realizing you forgot to buy milk is not an emergency. I've had people tell me that. I woke up in the morning and there wasn't any milk, so I had to go to the store. You didn't have to do anything. You fast the whole day on Yom Kippur. You can fast another day if you had to. It's not an emergency. But remember, this connects then to the Ruach and to the voices. There's more than one spirit. There's the spirit in man. There's the Ruach HaKodesh, Yahweh's spirit. And then there's the spirit of Hasatan. All of them are trying to jibber-jabber in your head. And each one's trying to convince you it's Yahweh's voice. Actually, two of them are trying to. Yahweh knows it's his own voice, and he's just waiting for the others to be quiet. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. May I have just one more?
Okay.
Thank you. You have very wisely cautioned us about not trying to judge who's in the covenant and who isn't. However, I did appreciate the clarity today when you came out quite strongly. I think I heard you correctly. When you see people leaving the path and trying to bring others along, I think I heard you say they're not in covenant. So have they fallen out of covenant? And at what point do we make a discernment that wouldn't be guilty?
Okay, so
make us guilty of judgment.
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, so every time anybody does anything against Torah, you're out of covenant for that moment. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about using discernment as to someone who's now left the path and isn't planning to come back. That's different. Or it's different than someone who's trying to covenant, but they're new at all this and they're still making a lot of mistakes because they don't know what they're doing. And they're trying and making the effort. We're comparing that, though, to someone who's decided, I've chosen to walk this other path. That's different than saying, oops, I messed up. They've now made a choice to now diverge the path and split and go in a slightly different direction. And by the way, some of them are going very parallel to what we're doing, but a little bit off. And over time, they're going to end up way, way, way further off. But they're close at the beginning. You use judgment and discernment to decide how much interaction you should have with them. Not with the fact that you may have somebody that you know here that's still struggling with some piece of Torah, but they're here and they're trying. Okay, see the difference? Okay, who's next? Okay, Tamara?
Okay, so I made a connection that I thought might be relevant. Okay, so let's try to move this over. Sorry. In Proverbs 2:11, where it says discretion will guard you, coming from the teacher background, my first thoughts were, the discretion, the adjective that is to avoid causing or revealing private information. But then I looked it up, and that adjective noun, also has the other definition of that would be the freedom to decide what should be done in a particular situation. And I'm just so grateful that Abba is able to make some decisions on my behalf to, for them to be a positive outcome.
Amen, amen. And I'm glad that the second definition was actually there because that's the one I used. Okay? Look, I want to say something. Of course, I'm not going to be accused of being cocky and all this other stuff, okay? But when I'm reading, my note just says Proverbs chapter 2, 1 through 22, and then verse 17 has the word covenant. That's all that's there in that one line, right? But if you want to see what the Ruach then looks like in the way I've been describing it, it's when I start and I get to verse 2 and I go, I spend 15 minutes talking about making your ear and inclining your heart. I believe that's all the Ruach giving me that. And when I get to the word discretion, I don't know what I'm going to do when I get to the word. I haven't written it down. I hadn't planned for it. I just got there and I stopped. As a matter of fact, in all of my reading through this, I never even had a thought in my head to say anything about discretion until I said it here. That, I believe, can be attributed to the Ruach trying to get his word out through my mouth as a teacher. So hopefully I said that without becoming an egomaniac, prideful, whatever anybody wants to cause. Okay? Because after all, as a teacher, you're hoping that's what you're doing, right? That you're getting out of the way and letting his word come through you. But I'm trying to show you how in my life what that looks like, and that I just allow, as I'm reading it, to stop wherever I feel the Ruach is leading me to stop and just start going in that direction. There's no preset, worked out stuff that I'm telling you. I just know that when I put the teaching together, I felt the Ruach said to me, Start here, end here, just start talking. Now, the reason I can do that is because I've been doing this for so many years and put so much in. There's so much already there for the Ruach to pull it out. And so that's what's there. And that's how the Ruach works. Now, that's not me claiming this is a word directly from the Ruach coming from Yahweh. That's for you to figure out and decide and discern. That's what I'm attempting to do. Does that make sense? I'm attempting to get out of the way and allow that. So it's hopefully not a whole lot of me and it's all him. But so that when I'm starting to go in these directions and then I'm piecing things and then all of a sudden we're in Deuteronomy 18. I don't have Deuteronomy 18 in my notes. I didn't know we were going to go there today. That happens every teaching. Because why? Because the Ruach hopefully is the one inspiring to jump here, jump there, and turn to that place. And so that's what it looks like when it says about him giving us out his word and how that word comes through, whether it's in Deuteronomy 8:3 or whether it's here in Proverbs, through the mouth. He says, out of his mouth comes knowledge. Well, he speaks through his anointeds. That's not me claiming I am one, by the way. That's, again, you to discern. But yet I'm going to be accused of all that stuff anyway, so I don't care, okay? It is what it is. But that's what it's supposed to look like. You should be hearing him out of whoever's speaking's mouth. And if they're not reading the word and reading a lot of verses, you're hearing more of them than him. Because mostly it should be coming right out. Read the verses, expand a little bit, read more verses, connect them together, show the linkages where everything links together, etc. Amen? All right, who's next? All right, live stream.
All right, we have from Janet Hoffman, 2:17 as a warning to all of us to be careful with those who left covenant. But what about the ones that are not covenanted? Do they also represent a risk? And which group is more risky?
The ones that you know growing up with that are still where you used to be, they are probably less dangerous to you than the ones who were in covenant. Because if the person that was with you in covenant starts going in a slightly different path that might be appealing to you, you may think that they're still in covenant, but you can go with them. Your friends and family members that you know are still either in nothing or in mainstream Christianity or some other religion, wherever they are, you already know you left that. So that's less tempting, less problematic. And some of you, they could do whatever they want to you. You're never going back to that. But the person that's going into a slightly just off flavor of where you were to begin with, that could tempt you a whole lot more. Okay, that could tempt you a whole lot more. So that would be my encouragement. Now, you really don't want to be spending a whole lot of your time with either group. It just doesn't make any sense. Why would you not prefer the fellowship and assembling together of those that are trying to go in the right direction? Because it will still rub off on you that some things from the other group. And if nothing else, a Christian way of thinking, if not doctrinally, Torah type things, but the mindset, the filters can easily start coming back to you if you spend time hanging out with them. And that is the risk, okay? So again, you need to use discretion, discernment, and discipline to figure out where those boundaries are. I am not advocating isolationism and all that other stuff. I have friends and family, just like you do, that are walking different paths. But it takes your wisdom, knowledge, all the stuff that we just read in the last 2 weeks, it's going to take all of that to know how to interact with them. Okay? How much and in what way? Robert.
From Cheryl, have the tares always been tares, but used by Yahweh to teach the wheat?
Would have no idea. I just know that they're supposed to be there, and we're not supposed to figure out who they are. We're not supposed to do anything to them because we will get it wrong. Okay?
All right. From Angelique, will you please give an example of situational awareness?
There are things that would be absolutely appropriate sitting in your living room that would not be appropriate sitting in this room. How's that for a very simple example? Okay? Because here you are watching live stream, and you're sitting in your living room or wherever you're sitting watching it, and there are people here in a formal service. And so some of you, although I don't think that would really be appropriate, but some of you may still be in your pajamas or whatever else you're doing watching the whole thing. But everybody here dressed up knowing they're coming to a public place. That's using a certain amount of situational awareness. Situational awareness, I'll give you an example when I teach my children. When you walk into a situation, you need to first be aware of what's going on before you decide how you're going to interact with the situation. You may actually, if you use a lot of wisdom, realize you need to turn around and step away from it because maybe it's something that's going on that needs to finish whatever it's doing before you get there. That's where children need to go into a room and not just jump out saying whatever they want to say, but may notice, oh, wait a minute, my mom or my dad or both are having a conversation with each other or some other person. I probably need to wait a minute and then say, excuse me, unless it's unless it's an emergency. Then situational awareness says, it doesn't matter the situation anybody else is doing. My situation is an emergency. I need to run in screaming fire, okay, or whatever it is. So situation, identify it, understand it, have an awareness of it, and then you'll have a better understanding of how to then interact with whatever's going on. Does that make it more clear? Okay? We tend to just jump into everything instead of taking that pause to ascertain and to, just observe and go, okay, what am I walking into? Will I be interrupting? Will I be adding to? Maybe do they even want anybody jumping into what they're doing right now? Because some people just walk into things and you look at them like, I don't want to be rude, but this is a private conversation, and they just walked right into it. And you really wish they would have noticed that it looked like something private, or at least asked, hey, is this, because that's having some wisdom and discernment to go, if I'm not sure, I should ask. Hey, is it okay if I join in, or are you guys having a little private thing? Okay, hopefully that answered the question with some examples.
All right. Comment from Pete Lamb regarding Deuteronomy 18:18. Those who think that this verse is prophesying Yeshua fail to grasp that it is Yeshua who is actually speaking through Moshe and not of himself.
Well, I think he was referring to himself also, okay, when he comes and people need to listen to his words. But he was primarily trying to tell Israel, there's going to be somebody after Moses in a position of authority that you need to listen to. And they failed over and over and over and over again in that role. And that's why even when Yeshua came, they failed. That's why he's coming with a rod of iron and full authority to clock some heads, because they're going to have to listen. But yes, he was talking through Moses more about other things than just about himself. Christianity and most of the Messianics teach it the other way, that it's all about Yeshua. Yes, it is pointing ultimately to him as the ultimate fulfillment of this multiple fulfillment thing, which is very Hebraic and very consistent in Scripture, that things happen multiple times, pointing to an ultimate fulfillment. Okay?
All right, next comment is from Adrian and Patricia Bogle. The entire Proverbs 2 chapter is contingent upon us doing our part, as the verse 1 starts with, my son, if you accept my words, then Yah will bless us.
Yep. Amen. And by the way, that's why we eventually get the word covenant in there, because this is all about covenant. Okay? It's all contingent upon he said and we said and what we agreed to. So yes, there's a contingency here, if. Yahweh said, if you obey everything that comes out of my mouth, then I will. But see, Christianity doesn't want to deal with contingencies. All you got to do is make your altar call, claim him as your Savior, and you're done. There's no performance expectation for you to do anything. Oh, that's works. You shouldn't be talking about works. The book is everywhere talking about works. Just as people wrongly link it to salvation. Salvation has nothing to do with works. Salvation has everything to do with reward. Works has everything to do with reward. Just go listen to the teaching on Are You Saved? The connection between salvation, faith, and works. Go ahead.
All right, from Doris Olson. If Father knows the beginning to the end, and calls us knowing we can handle the trials given. What if we fear we won't make it to the end? Does complete trust and fear of the Father correct it?
Okay, the last part is true. Yes, it corrects it. The middle part, we say, well, what if you're afraid? Well, that's where you end up with counsel, and that's where you end up having people to help you understand how to deal with the culturally and historically embedded insecurities and fears that most of us suffer from. And so at some point, you have to accept. Okay, I've had to do this with my wife and with my children, not saying anything negative about them, but I've had to go to them from the beginning of the relationship with them saying, you need to release some of this stuff, knowing that I will, if I tell you I will take care of it, you need to let all of the, but, there is no but. Trust and allow. That's not easy for a wife when she first gets married. That's not easy for a child until they experience it with their parent. But when I've gone to one of them and said, I will take care of it, and they're still nervous, I say, why are you still nervous? It's already done. It's going to be taken care of. So you are being afraid because you have not accepted the reality that he called you knowing you can do this. And that's the part where the fear of Yahweh has to come in. Go listen to that teaching over and over again. And by the way, if you've only listened to a teaching once, you only got about 8% of what you needed to get out of it. And I just picked that number out of the air, but it's a small percent, okay? You have to listen to these things 3, 4, 5 times to really get 70, 80, 90% of it. Because each time you listen to it, you're going to hear only certain parts of it. Whatever part you were ready for, whatever part you needed. And then once you got that handled, you'll hear other things that you didn't hear the first 2, 3, 4 times. That's why they're there, and that's why they're free. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Donald Armstrong would like for you to remark on Luke 17, verses 34 to 37.
Okay, so let's read this because this goes back to, now again, I think this person, I'm assuming, and I could be wrong here, so forgive me, that this is a person struggling with the whole left behind thing. It says, I say to you in the night that there shall be 2 in one bed, and one shall be taken, the other one shall be left. 2 shall be grinded together, one shall be taken, the other one shall be left. 2 shall be in the field, and one shall be taken, the other one shall be left. And answering, they said to him, where, master? And he said to them, where the body is, there also the eagles shall be gathered together. So, nowhere in this little section here does he say which one is left and which one is left behind. He assumes you already know Proverbs. Okay? There's nothing wrong with what Yeshua is saying here. Absolutely, this is what it's talking about. However, it doesn't say that the good one's taken and the other one's left behind. So let's be careful that we're not. See, we are filtering through the filters of what we've been taught. You've been told and you've been told and you've been told. And you know what happens when that happens? You read stuff that's not there into the verse. You read stuff in that it doesn't say. And that, look, when we do the midrashes at feast, I always say the same thing at every midrash. Before I agree with what you're saying, or we discuss it or whatever, we first have to agree to what the verse that you want to talk about says, not what you think it means or what it's trying to say. Then we can discuss what you think it means and what it's trying to say, but we first have to agree to what it actually says. This came from a person stood up at one of our first midrashes in 1999 or whatever it was, a feast. And they said, I want to talk about Revelation at the white throne judgment, the judgment of the damned. And I said, hold on, time out. It doesn't say that. Now, you want to make a case for why you think that's what it means, or what it's trying to say, that's fine. You can do that. I don't agree, but we can do that. But let's first read the verse and see what the verse actually says and doesn't say. And it doesn't say it's a judgment of the damned. Now, there's a lot of things verses don't say that actually we can interpret correctly and figure out what they mean, even though it doesn't say it. But you have to first agree to what it does say. Now, I can make a case for Luke connecting to Proverbs 2, and now making a case for what I think Yeshua was saying, and this is my evidence. It doesn't say anything. It just says one's left, the other stays. One's left, the other stays. One left, the other stays. That's all it says. Now we're left to figure out what that means. Okay, now you're free to make that case. But let's remember, we should first be careful of what it actually says before we decide what's an opinion, an interpretation, and a guess. Does that make sense? But what happens is you've heard it explained a certain way so many times, you assume that's exactly what it says. Yet, that's not always the case. Because the verse doesn't always say the things you think it does. I mean, we had a girl in our congregation, she was in first grade, and children in her school were saying that she didn't believe in the Bible because she didn't believe in Christmas, and not a single one of those kids didn't realize that Christmas is never mentioned anywhere in the Bible. But they were told it all the time in their church. They assumed it had to be there. But it's not. That's the problem with people. You know, you claim that you don't want to just fall for anything, but you don't realize how much stuff you've already fallen for. And so unlearning is so hard. Next.
All right, final comment from the live stream comes from Rabbi Tom.
Hey, Rabbi Tom.
He said he has read Mishlei for the past 4 decades, but never has it come so meaningful as it has in these past 2 teachings. Thank you, Rabbi Steve.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi Tom. Appreciate that very much. Thank you. I appreciate that. And that is very humbling for me because I know that he has read the Word and studied the Word, and it's always, you know, and that, by the way, shows you it's not because I'm smarter than he is because I got out of the way and he heard something from the Ruach that he needed to hear, and that's the blessing that's there. Okay, so I really appreciate that very much. All right, so let's go ahead and get the children. Shabbat Shalom! Shavua Tov! We love you! Oh,
I was not sleeping. I was
a knockout quarter.